Hi.
Hi. Hi, it's me, Elizabeth Nelson.
And I'm Amy Rigby, and you're looking for the magic. Did I
Have-
say that with a question mark on the end? You're looking for the
and you're
magic, sort of.
yes, well, I have half an eye on C-SPAN right now, just
Oh,
watching
okay.
the action unfold of our president's second impeachment. Um, so
Yeah, okay, good. Well, you'll tell us if there's anything going on that we anything crucial
indeed.
that we need to know. I kind of reached a point where I just had to kind of I couldn't hang in there any longer. Kind of felt, well, the impeachment's happening, so I just kind of disconnected for a little
Good.
while. But thanks for
We got to take
holding down
shifts.
the fort. Yeah.
So how are you?
I'm okay. I'm okay. I got a good winter hike in today, which was nice. Just get out in the nice cold and walk down by the Hudson River, and there was ice flowing, and it gave me a little bit of a hopeful feeling somehow,
Uh-huh.
as going out into nature can do. Just seeing that, like, yes, everything does, as Simon and Garfunkel once said, to everything. There's a season. Yeah, everything's kind of dead right
Mhm.
now,
Mhm.
frozen as can be, and just as brown and dead as it can be. But that feels like that's how it's got to be, and then things will renew, revive, and maybe there is this feeling of hopefulness that will come through. So that's how about you? You getting
Yeah,
any?
I mean, I don't think we have the same kind of wintry weather that you probably have been having. I thought I saw maybe some pictures of snow up by you guys, at least recently. We
Yeah,
haven't
there
really had
has.
that kind of wintry mix, but it has been cold. And your sort of description of walking along the icy Hudson um, will allow me to segue rather nicely into my recommendation for the week, which is a book
Oh,
that I
good.
picked up. There's a novelist, essayist, short story writer who everybody probably knows, called George Saunders. He's sort of a celebrated author of like our generation, or maybe the generation slightly older than us, I guess. I'm not sure of his age. I think, but he's alive. So that puts him in a rough generation with us.
Right, right.
But anyway, people adore him. I don't know his writing that well, and that's not any fault of his own. It's my own. Not much of a fiction reader, and I've tried to read some of his books, and I just never really connected with them because I don't know, I have a short attention span, or found like a dishy rock and roll memoir that was more interesting in the moment. But anyway, he has written this book. The title of which I believe is called "A Swim in a Pond in the Rain," and it is he teaches like an MFA workshop at Syracuse University
Hmm.
for creative writers, and the subject that he tackles is these short stories by like famous Russian authors, like mostly pre-revolution, and so like Tolstoy, um, Chekhov, Turgenev, Gogol, um, and these are things that are very alien to me, like creative writing, short stories. I don't read a ton of, and like academics is something that I've eschewed for a while now.
Hmm.
So picking up this book felt like an achievement just by picking it up. And it's actually really fascinating because what it is his kind of giving us access to this masterclass that he teaches on short Russian fiction. And your depiction of the Hudson reminds me of some of the Russian landscapes and everything, because they're just so like beautifully descriptive, and there's so many portrayals of nature. And whenever I do think about Russia, I do think of this sort of like snowy, kind of oppressive, gray, wintry scenes. And so, yeah, so he takes these short stories and then he kind of provides analysis and ways of thinking about writing yourself creatively, and why do we write. And while I am not a short fiction writer and don't aspire to be one, I think we can apply it to songcraft as well, because you only have a short amount of time to tell a story in a song. And while that's embedded often by music that can transfer emotion, a lot of times some of us lean hard on lyrics. I think probably
Absolutely, yeah.
you might agree with me. And so, I was like, okay, well, I'm not a short fiction person, so this is going to be weird. But if you actually kind of think about it in terms of the craft that we ply, it's fairly relatable, because you have to be efficient in terms of the message that you want to get across, because you don't have 600 pages to do so. You try to get the message across in 3 minutes in a song, or if you're Bob Dylan, maybe 7 minutes. But you can't really hang around that long and expect people to stay with you. And so, I started thinking about like, who's a really good craftsperson of like the short story song. And the one that came to mind for me was Eleanor Rigby, which I think is just a masterpiece. In 2 minutes, McCartney manages to get across an entire generation, emotion, and just this beautiful description of an entire world. And so I think it's helpful, as a songwriter, to try and figure out why write and how to be better about it. And then also why critique. And so as a person who also does that kind of analysis on the other side, I'm finding it a very rewarding read. If it's extremely heavy though, so, or like, it might not be completely accessible, and I might really hate it next week when I'm like, I can't do it, it's too much. But
Well,
so far,
I'm
so good.
excited about it. I have really liked George Saunders' short stories. I didn't read Lincoln in the Bardo, which was his novel that came out, I guess, maybe about 2 years ago. I have been working in a bookstore for many years, so
Right.
I feel, I really miss it, because we've been closed for the whole pandemic. Closed to browsers, and so I really miss that access to like what the new books are. And Tuesday was always the big day when the new titles get put out, and so I did actually stop by there the other day and saw that they had this book, George
Nice.
Saunders' book coming out, and because people do still buy books, and thankfully from small bookstores. In fact, people have been super supportive, and he was definitely, he feels like a kind of a maybe it's an upstate New York thing, because he is in teaching in Syracuse, but he always feels a little bit like a bit of a patron saint of the bookstore, and any book he's put out has been really kind of like anticipated by the customers. And so anyway, I see what you mean, that it looks pretty heavy, and like a lot of brain cells are going to have to go into kind of getting through that. But it looked like a really rewarding read, and so thanks for bringing that up, because I think it's going to be. I'm not as big of a short story reader as I used to be. When I discovered Raymond Carver back in the 80s, I that was like so huge for me. I just loved him, and it was a big inspiration for songwriting for me. So and I loved. I think it was 10th of December was the George Saunders book of short stories, and I'd recommend that if you want somewhere to kind of get into his. But I think the Russians have plenty to to tell us. So
For sure.
and through his eyes, I'd love in my fantasy life, I'm going back to school and he's my professor, but I don't know if that.
I think you'd love it then. I think you'd absolutely love it. I mean, I'm not that familiar with the Russians either. So it's just been an education from the gate, which has been great because there's the Russian short story telling, and that he, of course, picks the best ones. It's just been magnificent. Like I've just learned so much about how they write and how funny they are. And, I think of these pre-revolutionary kind of authors as being, oh, so oppressed or whatever, but there's so much humor. I mean, they've existed way longer than the United States. So, I mean, I'm just, I'm just thrilled to kind of be along for the ride at this point.
That's good. And I think, yeah, though, I actually just said to my husband the other day, I maybe something about the weather, maybe it's time to go in there again to Tolstoy, to Anna Karenina. I tried a couple years back and I just like I couldn't do it, but I something about the weather
Mm-hmm.
made me think that maybe it's time. And also just having time, that sort of time that you need to really like read a huge book and get all that you can out of it. It always feels like it will be this, huge, just transforming experience that, but it's just going to take the right moment. And, our one of our listeners, Norma, says, I'm about to start Crime and Punishment, perhaps because the semester just began. I don't quite understand. Is that a reference to your students or? But I think something that I'm glad we're starting off with, and that is a first for you then to kind of delve into the to the Russians. This is like I think that was our topic we talked about for this episode.
Ooh,
But
smooth segue.
yeah, so that's you got to start somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
With
Absolutely.
everything. And yeah, so we were going to talk about first musical experiences, and I was thinking last night about it and thinking with my first like real studio experience, how incredible that my band Last Roundup, we did some recording on a Tascam Porta studio, 4-track. We made demos. This was back in the 80s. But we then were going to go make a record in Nashville. And the studio was Cowboy Jack Clement's recording arms and spa. And it was such a legendary studio. I mean, I think like at the time I just like it didn't even register, like even though people were saying like, oh, that's where Johnny Cash recorded Ring of Fire. Like, oh, okay. Just like taking it as our due, like, oh, well, sure, like, and then now us, we're gonna record our hit album here, just not it's only in retrospect that things like that seem so magical, and just how was that even possible? And unfortunately the album that we recorded there never came out,
Uh-huh.
so it was like a huge disappointment in the end. It was, I think for years it just was something I looked at as a failure, but the experience of recording there is something that can't be taken away. It's not exactly shared with anybody else except me telling you right now. But at the time you just like why can't this record come out? And for years I thought it's a lost classic that we're going to take out of a drawer someday and go like, oh my God, this. And when my brother and I finally did listen to it, and it was like, oh, we just really weren't all the way bad anymore, and we weren't all the way good. Like we'd been kind of primitive and good in a way, in a very unschooled way that had been so great. But when we were making this record, we hadn't really gotten to the next phase where we were actually good, and so it kind of captured this awkward time, and so it never came out. But anyway, it was a great to have that experience of getting to meet the cowboy and
What
hang
was that
out. And
like?
he was a great guy. He was super cool, and I got to go back there years later during Americana Fest in
Mhm.
Nashville. He had a big barbecue and in his backyard, and so got to go by there and see him and see the place, and just remember being there and recording
Mhm.
there. But it was a strange place because it didn't there was no the control room did not look onto the recording studios, so you didn't see the people behind turning the knobs and all that. So it was I think if you were experienced, if you were Johnny Cash, you'd be like,
Sure.
oh, this is cool, I'm just in my own, I'm in my head, I'm in my own space here, not being overlooked, I'm just doing it. But if I think if you're kind of just starting out, you miss that encouragement from behind the glass or whatever, someone behind the desk giving you a thumbs up or kind of shaking their head no.
Right, right, right,
So
right. Like in the movies where, like you get the act into the studio
right, right.
and like, like in the engineer and the producer or whatever and the label guys are there obviously. And, they're just
Right,
kind of
right,
like,
right.
and then like all of a sudden, you just start ripping it up and they're like,
Magic's
okay.
happening, right, right.
Because that's the way it goes in the studio, folks. Yeah, I think like that was one of the biggest educations for me. Actually, was getting into the black box of the studio because I don't think I ever really totally understood exactly how a studio worked. When certainly when I went in for the first time, I didn't realize that you didn't just go and cut everything as a live band. You got one take and that was it. I mean, there's all of this trickery that you can do with overdubbing and, like you have to spend 8 hours getting drum sounds and like, you don't just like go in, set up and play like a live set. And so, um, I think I got deceived by the truncated sort of way that it appears in like pop culture or
Right,
whatever.
right.
And just listening to a record in general, like sometimes the immediacy of like a Stones record or whatever is like, oh, yeah. And a lot of that stuff was taken live. So I'm not trying to say that there was studio trickery going on, but I think I felt like, doing like vocal takes or anything, it's like, oh, well, we can, like you can do a couple takes. You don't just have to do one live with the band. Like that's your scratch vocal or whatever. So I
Right.
felt like, going into the studio is super boring. But it's also really fun if you kind of just lean into the experience of like learning everything. And even if it's just, for something that never actually gets released into the world, I think just like seeing the means of production in action is like actually really interesting before it gets boring. So I mean, like it sounds like that experience of like not actually having the eye contact with your engineer or
and
whatever
and
was
and
probably
also
really strange.
and also what you're describing as what you imagined how it was, that
Mhm.
actually is how it was. There were no overdubs in the
Oh,
studio. We
nice.
were supposed to do everything live as a performance. There were no scratch vocals. There were no like retakes.
Uh
It,
huh.
it so it was that was very demanding.
Yes.
And if it's working, you're going to capture lightning in a bottle.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
if
yeah.
it doesn't, if you're not up for it, then it's pretty disappointing. And it's one way of making records. The other way you're describing where you're laying down tracks and you're working it and you're fixing things and you're doing a couple vocal takes and you're making layers of sounds, and you're, even taking time in between takes, and kind of listening, and then coming up with other ideas. That's a super creative way of recording that I have loved for many years, and going back and doing it that very primitive, like all in one shot kind of way is, I don't know, it's pretty raw, it's pretty scary.
It is, and I'm not trying to say that one is better than the other. I just think knowing that like the option exists of like
Mm,
doing, if the guitar part is just wrong, somebody's out of tune or whatever. And like I hate over labored, overly produced stuff too. Like you can really sense when it's just being worked to death, and you have really really rich acts that have too much time in a super professional studio where it just seems like the spontaneity is gone. So I'm not advocating for one thing over the other. I felt like I thought it only went one way, which was just straight up
right.
live, out of the gate, like one take. And, because that's the way you see it in the movie, or even like, I guess that's the way it was originally done. If you,
Mm,
watch like American Epic or something where they have that machine where they kind of drop the plate and you have 2 minutes and 38 seconds to get the song done. And by the time the plate hits the floor, that's it. Like that's your,
right.
your
Wow.
wax cylinder that you take out to the world. And that's how they recorded like the Carter family. And those recordings are lovely, but yeah, there is a rawness and a, an authenticity to it that I think, I don't know. I don't necessarily think it's terrible to do a guitar overdub or a vocal
Oh,
overdub,
hell
or and
no.
I love backing vocals, so you can't always get your harmony
It's
singers in.
so
So
fun. All of that stuff is so fun, and
mhm.
making records, like, yeah, just building it up is, it's what a treat. What a
Mhm.
privilege to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, when we were, recording with Eric, your husband, we did a lot of kind of live stuff, and I think that there's so much energy and promise in material that is done totally and completely like one
It,
take wonders, I guess.
it's nice when you're able to be in the room together with
Yeah.
the people and be playing together, for sure. When I recorded with the Shams, and we were three vocalists, and we that was really tricky, because we found that when we like tried to take our parts separately,
Hmm.
it just never had the blend. Like it felt fake somehow. So
Huh.
we would end up having to like do it all at once, maybe on different microphones, but needing to be in the room, like just reaching for those notes at the same time, like just breathing the same air and in the same moment. So it took a lot of, it took a lot of time. It took a lot of work, and we still didn't always hit the notes, but but you could like feel the kind of vibe, like
Hmm.
the trying was part of it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so yeah, like perfection is overrated for sure.
Absolutely. It's the enemy of the good, I believe, is the uh, bromide or whatever the term is for. Wasn't perfection is the enemy of the good? Anyway, who knows? Yeah. Well, so will we not be hearing that last roundup record now that you've dug up the tapes? No promise
I
for.
mean, nowadays it's so easy to just throw out a, maybe a track from it could be. I
Mhm.
remember we did a really, I thought it was a nice version of speaking of the Carter family,
Mhm.
of the Carter family's picture on the wall. And it was just very spirited. And I remember liking that
Uh huh.
take that we got of that song, whereas a lot of the original songs, we ended up, getting better versions and
Yeah.
releasing those on an album. But yeah, there's no reason to not like put out something, yeah, like little cherry pick little good moments from a record like that. It doesn't have to be a full on release, or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
that you have to like get all the way behind. Like, no, tell yourself, tell the world, it's really good, honestly. It's a moment in time that you all should hear. It's so hard to like to get up the energy to like, or not the energy, but just to promote something that you've like sweated and labored
Hmm.
and really believe in the last couple years, let alone like something from 30 some
Right.
years ago. But yeah, it kind of makes me that kind of makes me want to get something out there, from that session, just to even like put it up on a desk and like hear what it sounds like now.
Yeah, I would be interested to hear what your reaction would be if you did that, and how it would go. I mean, I think it would be fun just as an artifact of your career, which is just so expansive, and so to like, because that was your first band, really, right? I mean, I know that I've read Girl to City, and so there are some instances where you were sort of playing with other people or kind of finding your footing. But would you say Last Roundup was kind of your first band? Speaking of firsts.
When I was writing songs, yeah. I
Uh-huh.
mean, I had the band Stair Kits, but that was more like I
Oh,
was
right.
playing drums, and yeah, it was. So Last Roundup was really the first band where I was contributing songs, and so yeah, it felt like and it lasted for longer than like two gigs. So so that seemed kind of like that was important too, that it kept going for quite a while. So
Mhm.
um but so other firsts, let's see, first tour, first early shows, anything that you remember stand out?
Um, yeah, I was trying to think about this, like I think the first time that I ever like played with like a live band, I played in bands and I played with Paranoid Style, obviously, but like I was I was a music major in college, and I think I've said this before on this podcast, where it was like I had all these ambitions and just marginal talent. I was very good, but very good is also not enough to quite cut the mustard in terms of being in like a music program in college. Like I
Mm.
realized like, oh, I was really good in high school, but now I'm like the fifth best, and being fifth best is basically just failing. Um, and so I had to, because I was a music major, like play in an ensemble. And I think all of the spirit had been beaten out of me to do anything sort of classically oriented. And I was up in Western New York, where there's a huge contra dance and square dance scene. And
Wow. What
so
what
I,
school what school were you at?
State University of New York, College at Geneseo, go
Genes-
Knights. Uh,
Geneseo. Where is that in relation to
it's
Rochester?
very
Or
close to Rochester, probably
okay,
about
I feel like
45
I've
minutes.
passed it on a highway somewhere.
It's a tiny town. I mean, I think it's still very tiny as well. I mean, it's a big sort of hippie community. A lot of salt mining and dairy farming, I think, were the primary industries back in the
Mm-hmm.
90s. Um, and so yeah, it was like this very isolated thing, and but the square dancing scene was just popping off. And so they had a string band, and I didn't want to play classical piano anymore. I didn't want to sing classical music anymore. I was, like I said, my spirit had just been broken. And so I quickly taught myself to play the accordion, which is very much like playing a keyboard. And I joined the string band because it was only one night a week of practice, and they had snacks. And so that was like really my first kind of experience of playing, with a live band. And we were playing a lot of folk music and a lot of sort of traditional Irish songs, and all of these, all this music that has been kind of appropriated and reappropriated over time, which also helped me think about music composition in a different way, because I always thought of it from this kind of very um, constrained classical perspective, where it was like I felt like everything always had to be so original. And then I realized that in fact, like all of these themes just get used over and over and over again, and
Right.
you can just take them. and make them your own and write songs using somebody else's melody or somebody else's like one lyrical idea. And I'm not advocating for plagiarism at all, but it just sort of opened up this world of like, you don't have to be so inhibited when you write. And so I learned a lot, like just playing the accordion with all of these kind of square dancing Western New Yorkers.
So people were dancing while you
Oh my
were
gosh,
playing.
it was crazy. I mean, it was such a it was like it was actually really illustrative of like the distinction between like, you know, town and gown, I guess is the phrase of like the academics. And I know your friend Norma was saying that I eschew academics. I don't. I love academics, but you know, it's like there were townies, like legit people who came from their job, you know, working at the dairy farm or working in the salt mine, and they'd come and they'd dance with, you know, their wife or their husband or their girlfriend or boyfriend. And then kids from college came and danced. And so
So it was
it
a
was,
good like
it was a
meeting
good
ground
mix.
for
Yes.
everybody. That's
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, you know, square dancing, I didn't know very much about it, but it's certainly rollicking and you know, it's really, really, quite difficult if I mean I know it's, you know, it's like a minute to learn, but you know, to actually be good at it and know how to
Yeah.
appropriately switch partners and do all the moves and everything. So I was it was an education. So I would say that was probably my first like gig, because we would go out, you know, and play and entertain all of the square dancers. How about you?
Well, again, you know, talking about last roundup, and it is just like going back such a long way. But when I think of our first tour, I mean, basically, it was like a history of like American roots music. We
Uh-huh.
opened for Doc Watson, we opened for Bill Monroe, and
Amazing.
then it was like we played with the Los Lobos, we played with Alejandro Escovedo, the True Believers, his band,
Yeah,
great
yeah.
band that he had. Um, we I remember playing with, you know, we were opening for Bill Monroe upstairs in this venue, and Jimmy Dale Gilmore was playing a gig in the bar downstairs. Um, and yeah, so it was pretty amazing that I think, you know, we were on Rounder Records, so that
Uh-huh.
was
Yeah.
probably, you know, like led to us getting some of these gigs. We just put out a record on Rounder, and but you know, we were pretty green, really. And it was just such a, I don't know, I just feel like it was so lucky, so fortunate. I mean,
Yeah.
when we weren't opening for people, we were usually playing to like 10 people in Lincoln, Nebraska. Or, you know, like it was hard to find an audience, you know, for like a country band with a new record out with on Rounder. You know, so it wasn't all like the glamorous footlights and, you know, sharing the stage with Dwight Yoakam and stuff, but it was pretty fucking cool that we got to do
That's
all that.
I
Um,
mean, gosh, just what an incredible, you know, murderer's row of talent. I seem to remember there was a story in your book about how you were opening for someone and maybe it was a poorly attended show. And it was like somebody really great, like Doc Watson or somebody. Did that happen or did I dream that?
I'm sure there was. It wasn't. I remember with Doc Watson, that was a real good crowd, but I'm trying to think um, who it could have been. It seemed like, you know, the audience was definitely there at these places for to, you know,
Oh, good.
to come and see the forefathers, like, you know, like Bill Monroe and stuff. But sometimes when it was just us, it wasn't quite it wasn't quite such a big audience. But you know, it was a good like cross section of and we really covered a lot of ground. And so that, you know, and then I think like with the Shams, it was more like a sort of 90s, almost like alternative indie rock sort of, you know, I think we actually played a show with Soul Asylum, you know, the
Hmm.
Water Boys, Indigo Girls, Urge Overkill. It was always
Right.
um, so. Oh, someone says, oh, that's a good question. Yeah, was it Porter Wagner? I did go see Porter Wagner at the
Okay.
Lone Star, and it was a very sparse attendance, but we weren't opening.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But I think that must be what you're remembering, because it was kind of devastating
It broke my
to
heart.
see that, you know. But then I think like many years later, he came back to New York, and when he was like practically 80, and it played for a lot of people, and I think people came around. But yeah, that was really, it was heartbreaking. But he put on a great show anyway, and just like wore the suit, and you know, just like
Yeah.
did everything you'd want him to do, and was a total pro and a real country star.
Hmm.
But but yeah, those first those early shows, certainly it's I think, you know, when you're just starting out, you can kind of, a lot of it is just pure dumb luck.
Hmm.
And you know, I don't know what it's like for bands today. Well, you know, not literally like this day and this year, but but just like just starting out, I guess. Yeah, that old thing of like trying to open for people to get a, you know, gig as the support act
Yeah.
um, is I guess, yeah, the good thing that you're looking for if you're just getting started. And but any questions from our listeners out there? Anybody want to ask anything about firsts?
Yeah. I was thinking that we should have some kind of like nickname for our loyal and beloved
Oh yeah.
listeners. Like I was trying to think like Magic Coutiers, or I was trying to think like
Oh, that's cute.
opening for Amy Rigby is fun. That is really true. Actually,
Oh,
to your point about being an opening band, as a person who is still perennially the first or second of three. You and Eric have been very, very generous with offering us opening slots, and they are some of the most fun and the best attended shows that we've done. And so, yeah, so I owe you a great deal of thanks for giving your friends in DC a shot.
well, that's nice. Well, Michael White, unfortunately, when he opened for me, and I really loved hearing him play, and it was at this cool place in Rockford called Mary's.
Hmm.
But it also happened to be like the night, I don't think it was the last night of the World Series, where Chicago and Cleveland were,
Uh-huh.
but you don't play in Rockford when
Hmm.
there's a Cubs game going on, and in the World Series. So it was a Sunday night, and yeah, it was a little bit light on the attendance, but it was such a cool place, and I really liked hearing Michael play, and the people who were there did enjoy themselves very much. So but hopefully, I hope that Mary's place is still there, and hope to get back there sometime, because it sounded great in there. You know
Hmm.
how I feel like they used to say like you had to have like at least, well, hopefully two of three things going for you with the show, like the sound
Uh-huh.
be great, the
Yep.
audience, and the money. So, like, if you have all three of those, you know, that's really great. You know, that's like a perfect night. But if you have two of those, like you got paid and it sounded great, you can, you know, or if there's people
Yeah.
and it sounded great, but you didn't get paid, but they had a great time. You know, I
Yeah.
don't know,
Yeah.
but like one of those things on its own is maybe not enough to feel like it was a success. Oh, now what does Paul Healy say? I saw Ralph Stanley in London when he was in his 80s. Laura Cantrell was
Oh,
supporting,
oh
and Bobby
wow.
Gillespie from Primal Scream was in the audience. That's so cool. I actually saw that tour in Dublin. I saw Laura open for Ralph Stanley at some beautiful old theater in Dublin. I think it was in like 2003 or something.
Wow.
I just like happened to be touring over there and was lucky to go, and Laura did great, and Ralph Stanley was that was such a great show. I wonder where was the gig in London? Where did you see Ralph Stanley? Was it the Barbican or however you say it? Sure, it was some esteemed, some fine venue that'll hopefully open up again.
Huh. All right, so let's see. We got a question here. How quickly can you tell that you have a good crowd? Have you ever turned a dead crowd around? Oh, interesting. Huh.
I'm trying to. I think, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like if you're opening for someone, it can take a little work to get them to pay attention, maybe, or to not, to kind of open their minds. But I guess it depends also who you're opening for. I remember reading that like when Sonic Youth were opening for Neil Young, that was very difficult. There's certain
Yeah.
like combinations that like the audience is not actually like predisposed to liking anybody open for their god.
Yeah.
Whereas some people are very, like I think a great gig was, and I never did it, but opening for John Prine was
Oh,
always,
wow.
always seemed like he picked the people to open for him, and so his audience would know that and would be respectful and really kind of, well, they had the Prine seal of approval, so that was good enough
Yeah.
for them, and but
I mean, it being as you know, a person who has done tons of opening slots, recently, not this year, but recent past, it's tough to be the opener because you can't blow the headliner off the stage. You have to really find this balance of, like, not being too loud or not being, so like, I don't know, like idiosyncratically different than, who
right.
your headliner. You really have to think about how to be, if you're a thoughtful band, which I think we try to be, like you have to really think about who you're opening for and being respectful of them because they're the person that they come to see. But you also want to, if people are paying attention, get them sort of psyched and
Right.
maybe, like transform them into a fan as well. And so it's actually a bit of a heavy lift. I mean, it's obviously a huge honor to get to open for lots of people. And so just the excitement of getting to do that is always great. But then there's the calculation of like, well, we can't be, too loud or too soft, or, we have to kind of try and match it. And so I think if I can't, I mean, that Sonic Youth, Neil Young double bill, I can imagine must have been a tough sell to like diehard Neil Young fans. But I mean, they share so much in common, that I think it would actually be really thrilling to be in the audience for that if you weren't a fan of Sonic Youth. Oh wow.
This is
Michael
this
White
is
says
a
he saw
tough one.
T-Bone. Yes. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Mick Ronson was his
So
guitarist.
what
Okay, so
does he say?
he says, I saw T-Bone Burnett open for The Who. It was brutal. The guy next to me was telling me how much T-Bone's guitar player sucked. It was Mick Ronson,
Oh
which
my
is,
God.
this is like reminiscent of a story that my husband Tim told me about the time that he saw Steve Forbert open for Dylan. And I guess this was during sort of Dylan's more fallow phase. And so probably he was given the brief. Steve Forbert was given the brief that he could only play acoustically. So my Tim told me that like he has had this sort of allergy to Steve Forbert for so long because he saw him open for Dylan, and it was really, really bad because it was just him and this acoustic guitar, and the venue was huge, and his voice was just getting totally blown out. And you know, everybody was there to see Dylan anyway. And then Steve Forbert, who's not actually an untalented songwriter or player,
Oh my God,
just
no,
was
I
just
love him.
totally overwhelmed by the room and by the circumstance. And you know, I mean, Dylan was not at the peak of his performance, so they kind of just sent him out there as cannon fodder.
Oh no.
It sounds like, and so having been the opening band for some acts, which I won't mention, where you are basically cannon fodder, that really, really sucks. So poor T-Bone, I mean, and poor Mick Ronson, that's undeserved. But I hope the
Terrible.
Who was good. Iron Maiden is rumored to be the hardest band to open for, says Paul Healy, but he hasn't seen them.
Wow. That makes sense. I doubt that I'll ever have the honor of opening for them. So I'm not
Don't
gonna
give up the dream,
never say
Amy.
never. Never
You're
say
looking for
never.
the magic. Come
That's
on.
right. But I see Iron Maiden is a singular live experience. Jason says so.
I imagine.
I I would go. You know, I wouldn't mind being in the audience. But we'll see. We'll see when. It's not the first, you know, not the first group I'm gonna rush to go see when we can. And is Rush still available? Like,
They are, and they're a great live show, by
I
the
bet.
way.
I bet. But yeah, who? Speaking of firsts, who would you be who would be the first band that you would, you know, just like grab a ticket and go see if that was possible?
Oh,
Like as soon
wow.
as it became possible again.
I think that is such a great question because I have been really kind of opposed to the idea of going to see live music. You know, I've just been so afraid. So I'm trying to decide what the poll would be. Do you have an answer to that question?
Um, no, I I feel like I see things announced
Mm-hmm.
for maybe for autumn,
Yeah.
and but I don't see myself like looking for tickets for anything, or I don't know. It just feels too soon
Yeah.
to like it feels too soon to be planning any shows to play out there.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to get my head around anybody else being out there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I think we talked about this on one of the earliest shows
Right.
about how you know, seeing the Rolling Stones is something I would like to do
Yeah.
if it was possible. Um, I think that would be great. And I don't know. I'd really just like to see anybody.
Yeah.
You know,
I feel like
just like
if like a friend came through town like Scott McCoy with one of his many, you know, constellations of superstars that he has behind him, if it's -5 or Baseball Project or whatever, as long as it was safe, I'd probably go see him, just because he's so fun and we just love him so much. Or if you and
yeah,
Eric came to town, we'd obviously go see you guys. Um,
yeah.
but yeah,
Just like hearing you, you know, when you mentioned Steve Forbert, and I can imagine that would have been really because he's got such a quirky voice and
hmm
style about him,
hmm
and but I did get to see him fairly recently in Hudson, and you know, just at a nice intimate venue, and just hearing his voice and seeing him play, like it just right there in the room,
yeah,
you know, that it just like just even thinking about it still like gives me like little chills, like just thinking it's just this visceral experience, and it's their it's that unique character that is in someone's voice, and they're playing, and to just be in the same room with it is really such a special thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And he's great. I mean, we like have these like little, streaming related radio stations, and his songs come on and I'm always kind of blown away
Yeah,
by
like
how
who is that?
gifted. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's Steve Forbert.
He's
So I guess I go see him if he came through
unmistakable.
town. All right. Well, I mean, have we
Maybe
solved first or?
I think, yeah, we've definitely like gotten through a little bit. I think maybe if anybody has a suggestion of a topic for
Yeah.
next week, that
Yeah.
maybe that could be something fun. Like come up with something, stump us, or
Yeah.
challenge us.
I think
You don't
we've
wanna
got to come up with a
coast.
nickname, and once we
Yeah,
get the
yeah.
nickname, then it's going to be an unstoppable force, which we're going to have to, put walls up. So I don't
That's
know.
okay. Good.
If we come up with that galvanizing thing in an email address or something,
Okay,
maybe
right.
maybe
Where
we can
people can
get
get in
the
touch.
people. Anyway, my tea towel
I
proudly
saw that. I'm so
hanging.
amazed. Thank you so much for.
Everybody should buy one. They're
Yeah,
beautiful. It looks
I
awesome. It's so good. I just
I
love it.
just printed another round, and yeah. So I finally caught up with with all the orders. It was hard, but I really love doing it. So it's
Good.
been, it's a good like side job. Now that
Awesome.
since I'm unemployed. So, but well, it's been really nice to see you, and I'm gonna go get my copy of the George Saunders book. I picked up All Right, All Right, All Right on your
Oh, yay.
recommendation,
Cool.
the story of Dazed and Confused, and it's a really fun read. And
That's
then
a lot of
we
fun.
watched it the other night too, which was, which kind of was necessary to like get back into like, oh that guy, and so anyway, that was a great recommendation. So
Fun.
on the other end of the spectrum,
Yes, yeah, total
the
sublime
Russian
ridiculous.
writers, right? Perfect.
All right. Well, I'll see you next
All right.
week. Inauguration Wednesday.
We'll be there.
We'll hopefully be here.
Yeah.
All right.